So basically they're nerves that have the nuclei in and around the cranium. So some of them go into the brain stem, some of them are up higher into the cerebrum, and some of them are what are actually considered like a nerve tract. And we talk about the first and second as being nerve tracts where the nerve's actually coming right out of the brain. So here's kind of a summary view of them. There's 12. And so they originate at various different points along the brain and brain stem and midbrain and all those kinds of things. We're not really going to get into where all the nuclei are of all the cranial nerves and stuff. We're just going to talk about what they do, whether they're sensory or motor or mixed, and then how to examine them. So like I mentioned, the first and second cranial nerves are considered like spinal tracts, or nerve tracts. And so the optic nerve is considered a nerve tract. The 12 cranial nerves are considered part of the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system being the brain and the spinal cord. Excuse me, the cranial nerves are part of the peripheral nervous system. And they either have a specific name or they have a Roman numeral. And then cranial nerves that have motor functions have a nucleus in the brain stem. And so then the motor fibers from the cortex of the brain stem are upper motor neurons. And then the nerve where it actually goes to the motor portion would be the lower motor neuron. Well, when we talk about it more, you'll understand a little better. But basically, like you can have, like when we talked about before, where you have motor nerves to the skeletal muscles, you have the nucleus is in the cerebral cortex, and then it goes down and it has a synapse. And then you have the lower motor neuron that goes from the anterior horn of the spinal cord to the muscle. So the cranial nerves that we're going to be talking about are the actual lower motor neurons, if it's a motor neuron. And then same thing, if it's a sensory one, it's going to have 3, and it's going to go to the thalamus, just like the other sensory ones. Okay, so the second order one is going to go to the thalamus, it's going to have a synapse there, and then the third one is going to go up to the brain, to the cerebral cortex. So here's the different mnemonic, the mnemonic that's commonly used. Right? And then here's another one, a mnemonic for memorizing which, if it's sensory or motor or both. So some are purely sensory, some are purely motor, and some are both. So when Amber was making this up, she left out the one word right here, but we can figure it out. Well, of course, yeah. In any case, it means it's the whatever word you put in there begins with a B, so vagus is both sensory and motor. So now we'll start with number 1. Right? What's the nerve that's the part of your face that sticks out the farthest as you go forward? So here we're starting with number 1. And you can have head trauma that can affect the first cranial nerve or the olfactory nerve. Or sinus problems, things like that. You can have a partial or complete loss of smell. It can affect both sides or it can affect just one side. Then what you're going to do for that is, remember we talked about having some little container to put something for the person to smell. You don't want to use anything strong like ammonia or perfumes that people are going to be allergic to. What I was using before was spices or coffee, something like that. You can use soap, different kinds of herbs or spices. If you're using the essential oils or aromatherapy type stuff, you can do that. Just don't pick one that's really strong. And then basically you're going to have them close their eyes and cover one nostril, and then you're going to ask them, can you smell what that is? And you could use like a orange peel or something like that, but obviously an orange peel is not going to have smell for a long time, whereas spices like cloves or cinnamon, coffee, it's going to last longer. So you can ask them, do you smell something? And if you do, tell me what it is. Now when explaining the optic nerve, you talk about tracts, optic nerve and optic tract. It gets a little bit complicated when you talk about visual fields and stuff, so I'm going to make a copy of something from the brain coloring book. No, they don't use it. So here you have the optic nerve, and then this is going to be the optic tract. Okay? So the nerve is what comes from the eye itself. So that's going to be right here. Okay, so the pointer is there. And then you can see how there's a green part of it, and that's what's called the nasal portion, and then the temporal. So you're going to talk about the back part of the eye on the retina, and when, say, if we're looking at the right eye, then this is what's called the nasal portion, and then this is the temporal. So you have the nasal information from the nasal side and the temporal side coming back from the optic nerve right here. Okay, and then it's going to split. Half of it's going to go over to the other side of the brain, and then half of it's going to stay onto the same side of the brain. So that's basically a way, your body's way of building in a safety feature, so that if you have, if you have an injury here, you'll have still both something from one eye going to both sides of the brain. So it's basically, building in a safety factor, so if you have injuries, then you're most likely to preserve some of your visual field. And then eventually the information is going to get all the way to the primary visual field, which is going to be back in the occipital lobe. And then where this cross is right here, it's called the optic chiasm. Okay? So the nasal field is going to cross to the other side, where the temporal side is going to go to the same side. So you talk about the visual field and then the portion of the eye. Okay? So if you're looking at one eye like this, this is the temporal portion of the eye, and it's going to see the nasal visual field, or the left visual field. Okay, so the left visual field is what's out there that you're seeing, and that information is going to go to the temporal side of the right eye and the nasal side of the left eye. So I'm going to have a copy of something like this drawing right here, so you can make some notes on it when she gets back with it. But just basically remember that the visual field is what you see out there. So your right visual field would be over here. Okay? So this is what's all the way onto this side is your right visual field, and it's going to go across to the brain, and it's going to see your left temporal part of the eye and the right nasal part of the eye is what you're going to see from over here. Right? So it's hitting the eye that way like that, and then the opposite's going to go over here. Right?